After beginning to write the seal, his first attempt, Taleon actually had to go back to the beginning several times. After his teacher informed him that he was improperly drawing the seal, being too hasty. Creating a seal required a certain amount of perfection within the drawing of the seal. If you were too hasty, if it was drawn improperly, the ink was too thin in some places and too thick in others, it would create imbalances within the seal, every imperfection taking away from the seal's effectiveness as a whole and its overall stability. So Taleon actually had to take several attempts before he created one that his teacher felt was of a high enough quality to withstand holding a spell within it. Okay, I think that should be good enough. Okay, so now I just visualize the spell, right? And put it into the seal. No, actually, seal specialists get to skip visualization. Normal casters have to visualize because they're doing it all in their head. But seal specialists aren't required to visualize anything. In fact, even the regular emotional concentration that's required in order to channel specific emotions, in order to mold the demonic energy into the facet that you need it in, isn't really required of a seal specialist. All that's required is that you produce the seal itself in a solid state. After that, it's simply a matter of controlling the specific amount of demonic energy that you're putting into it in a very controlled and measured way. You don't actually have to focus on any specific emotions or concentrate on the aspects of the spell because you've already drawn them into a solid state. Basically, from here on out, it's just focusing your energy correctly, which is actually troublesome, so don't be surprised if your first attempt burns into ashes or doesn't take hold. Okay, I suppose, Taleon replied, looking down at the sheet of paper. So, do I have to wait for the ink to dry? No, actually, his teacher replied. When it comes to seal experts, and especially using the ink format, it's actually best to do it when the ink is still wet, before it has time to dry and set. That's when the ingredients are the freshest and the most pliable for storing your demonic energy. Paper specifically is most likely going to be an issue for you. What? Why? Taleon asked. Well, it's because of the amount of energy you produce, kid. The amount of demonic energy you produce is, well, far and away, absolutely massive by most comparisons. Even most mid-rank demons don't have the level of demonic energy that you possess, and you're not even an adult yet. And you have basically no training whatsoever. And yet, if it came down to a contest between you and a mid-level demon with training, and a few years of it at that, you would still win. At least in terms of the amount of demonic energy you possess. Now, in terms of casting and using spells, for most that's a great benefit. You have an ample supply, so you're unlikely to undershoot and get a fizzled spell. But it greatly increases the possibility of you overshooting, which in most cases isn't a problem. It just results in a more powerful spell that does more damage or heals more injuries, or fulfills whatever facet that it was supposed to with a greater amount of power. But, as I said before, seal specialists have to be very precise, meaning the chances are you're going to overshoot this. Even when you're trying to hold back and not put as much energy as you can into it. The sheer amount that you produce makes it more difficult to produce a small amount. You're more likely to try to produce a small amount and produce amounts so large that it will, well, burn that piece of paper to nothing. So, I'm pretty sure we're going to be here for a while. The trick here, Taleon, is to create a very slow, steady flow of demonic energy and then press it into the paper and the ink. That's what these 5 circles outside of the primary circle are for. They're finger placements. What you do is you place your fingers into the designated circles, and by focusing your demonic energy into your hand, it flows into the paper, connecting to the circle and filling it with power. So, don't let me stop you, kid. Go ahead and make your first attempt, Salas said, as he stepped back for a moment, crossing his arms, looking over Taleon as he began to lift his hand, moving it towards the paper. Rico was also sitting very close by, simply smiling and watching. Don't worry, Master. I think you'll do great. Teacher underestimates you. I'm sure Master Taleon will have it in no time. She wouldn't be surprised if you got it your first attempt. Well, thanks for the vote of confidence, Rico. It's appreciated, believe me, he said, looking with a somewhat disgruntled expression towards Salas. Hey, stop giving me dirty eyes and do the job. Snap, snap with the magic, kid. You're wasting time. Fine, Taleon said, as he put his fingers into position on the paper. Okay, very small amount of energy in a flow. Oh, before you start, Salas said, looking down at Taleon as he started to close his eyes. Don't try to gather demonic energy like you did before. That'll just assure you overshoot this. The natural amount of demonic energy that you have in your body should be more than sufficient, without having to gather any up. I don't want this to take all day with you figuring that out. So, rather than trying to gather any demonic energy, just focus on the demonic energy that you already have flowing, and then direct that flow towards your hand and your fingers. Fine, Taleon replied, as he looked back towards the paper. Okay, control the flow of the demonic energy that's already there. Just a small amount, a little bit. Taleon stared at the piece of paper, trying to remember the sensation of forcing the energy that he had gathered into his head and stomach, but redirecting it, changing it to focus towards his hand. As he did, Taleon began to notice a thin silvery glow over his hand. It was much lighter than before, when it basically encompassed his entire body. The glow was almost imperceptible, with only a few silvery sparkles coming from it. He smiled as he looked down at the paper, beginning to glow somewhat, the ink seeming to alight with that same silver glow, as a smile crept across his face. It's working, he said, looking down at the piece of paper. And just as he said it, he began to note that there was smoke coming from the paper. At first, just a small amount, but in only a moment or two, the entire thing simply caught fire, burning away to ashes in a moment of seconds, a matter of seconds, and leaving nothing in its wake, just floating away on the first breeze that passed by. It didn't work. As I said, kids, you overshot it. Too much energy. But I was barely using any. I mean, seriously, you could barely even see any glow. Yeah, kid, but that little glow was basically the equivalent of a low-level demon pushing max. The outflow was still way too high for the spell that you were using, and the substance you were trying to put it into. This training is actually good for you. It'll teach you finite control of your demonic energy, which will come in handy even when using other abilities and techniques. And trust me, you've far from learned it all yet, kid. And having a good measure of finite control will definitely make you more capable than your father. I mean, seriously, that guy's got basically no control. But he doesn't really have to. The amount of demonic energy he possesses is, well, absurd. Completely and utterly freaking absurd. I mean, seriously. Even me and all the demonic energy I possess barely hold a candle to it. I'm like a glass of water standing next to a swimming pool when it comes to me and him. Wow, does he really have that much power? Yes, kid, he absolutely does. Even most high-level demons still pale in comparison. His demonic energy level is absurd by any measure you want to take. There are very few in the demonic realm who are his equal. The only people that I could surmise might come close might be the armored dragon that rules the great mountain of the demon world. What? An armored dragon? I didn't know dragons had to wear armor. It's not something he wears, kid. It's his scales. His scales are so thick, they're basically armor plates. He is, without doubt, one of the most powerful beings in the demon world. But, unlike most powerful demon beings in the demon world, he rules nothing and over no one. He lives in a primal state, basically simply claiming the great mountain of the demon world as his sole territory. And anyone who bothers stepping foot there had better be willing to die. He doesn't exactly like guests. There's also the Black Iron King, who rules a kingdom nearby, your mother and father's. One of the rulers of the Great Four Kingdoms. In my personal opinion, screw that guy. He's an asshole. Oh, and if you ever see him, under no circumstances are you to trust anything he says, take any advice he might give you, or think of him as a reasonable or considerate person. He's a freaking monster, in every sense of the word. Trust me, you don't even want to know the kind of horrors that man has been behind in his lifetime. There are several other forces in the demon world which are definitely to be reckoned with, but I suppose I'm getting off track. Right now you need to focus on your magic. Get another piece of paper and try it again. Do we have to keep using paper? Can't we use something stronger? That would make it easier for me. As I said, kid, gaining finite control would be an advantage to you. Trying to skip over finite control and just get something stronger to put the spell into won't really benefit you, at least in terms of combat.